Welcome back to Objective 5 in Chapter 6 of our 3A1 series. In this objective, we're going to explain the effects of shear forces and bending moments in a beam and then look at the compression and tension profiles of a loaded beam. And this is going to be a pretty quick objective just to get the concept of shear forces and bending moments across, and then we'll take a look at in the next couple of objectives, actually calculating them. So to start off with, let's talk about what a shear force is. Now, we've spoke about shear force as regards to a shear stress, where our lines of force are not directly in line. And we can see that here on our diagram, and we get this scissoring or shearing type effect across our beam. And this is what we mean here by a shear stress or a shear force. So if that beam was fixed in position and one force is pushing up at the left-hand end and another force is pushing down at the right-hand end, then there's going to come a point towards somewhere in the middle of the beam where the beam is going to want to shear. That is, part of the beam is going to want to move up and the other part of the beam is going to want to move down. Now, from a design perspective, we need to know where these positions are, and we also need to know whereabouts the location requires to be reinforced so it can withstand this shear force. Now, another type of force at play with a beam is a bending force, and this is going to also lead us to bending moments. Now, with regards to beams, there are two types of bending forces that we can talk about. These are called hogging or sagging. Now, if we talk about sagging first, because this one's the most intuitive to realize in our heads. If we take a beam and we start putting lots of load on top of the beam, there's going to come a point where the beam's going to bend downwards because we've overcome the strength of the beam and it starts to bend. Well, this is what we simply refer to as sagging, where the beam then takes in a concave shape. Now, the one that's not so obvious to sort of get through in your head is the hogging one that we see here in diagram A. This is simply the opposite of sagging, where it's concave. Hogging is now convex, i.e. it's bending upwards. The classic example for power engineering of hogging is when we shut down something like a steam or a gas turbine. The bottom of the beam, or the bottom of the shaft, this will be sitting in the lubricant, which will cool down, and the top of the shaft won't be sitting in the lubricant, so it will still be hot. We will now get different halves of our shaft cooling at different rates, and because the bottom cools faster than the top, the shaft will bend upwards, and it will hog. This phenomenon occurs in steam turbines and gas turbines, which is why when we shut them down, we put them on turning gears so that they cool down nice and evenly. So there's a classic application for hogging, which is the one that's not so intuitive. Now, we can relate this idea of hogging and sagging in what's known as a stress distribution diagram for a beam or a shaft or whatever it is we're talking about. Now, unfortunately, the diagram in your textbook, it doesn't make it super clear as to how this thing works. All it does say is, however, that this particular diagram in figure 17 relates to the sagging phenomenon that was found in figure 16b. Well, what we can do with these is we can break these up into two individual parts and take a look at them and hopefully make figure 17 here make a bit more sense. Okay, so let's first consider a beam that's going to sag. And we can see that here at the bottom right of my slide. Because again, it's taking on this concave shape, meaning it's sagging. Now, if we were to consider a point on top and a point below the beam, we could consider whether that is in compression or tension. Now, the easiest example to sort of get this through is imagine drawing a couple of dots with a Sharpie pen on the top and the bottom of the beam. Now we pick the beam up and now we bend it in the direction indicated. On the top of the beam, those two dots are going to move together because it's being squeezed together because it's in compression. On the underside of the beam, they're being pulled apart, so the dots are moving away from each other because it's in tension. So now, one half of the beam is in compression and the other half is in tension. We can now represent this with our stress distribution diagrams that to me always look like dicky bows or sort of tuxedo ties. Now we can see that this particular stress distribution diagram here looks or relates to a classic construction I-beam. And we can see here that directly to the center of the diagram is a point known as the neutral axis, because the tension will be maximum at the bottommost part of the beam, and it will be minimum at a point towards the center. Once we then pass that point, the compression force starts until eventually we get to a maximum compression force on the top of the beam, or the outermost top of the beam. So we can end up representing this stress distribution diagram. The point at where it crosses over is simply the point we call our neutral axis. And this is how we end up with our stress distribution diagrams. The size of these sort of triangles that are created gives us an indication as to the amount of compression and or tension. Now we can do that with the other way around. So if we were to take our beam again at the bottom of my diagram and place the beam into a hogging position, which means it's now bending upwards, consider these two dots again on the top and the bottom of the beam. This time, our two dots on the top of the beam, when the beam hogs, are going to move away from each other because the beam's in tension. And at the bottom this time, those two dots are going to move closer together because it's in compression. So it's the exact opposite. So once again, we can represent the amount of tension and the amount of compression by the area within the triangle on our stress distribution diagrams. Compression will be a maximum at the bottommost section of the beam, and it will then be a minimum getting down to zero at some point in the middle of the beam. Then there comes the crossover point, which is where we get our neutral axis, and now tension forces begin, and now that starts increasing up to a maximum tensile stress at the top outermost section of the beam. Now this is how we can relate these stress distribution diagrams. Now at third class level, we won't actually ever have to draw one of these diagrams. You'll get into drawing them when you do your 2A1 and you look at beams in a bit more detail. At third class level, you just have to be able to understand one of these beams and talk about why we even use them. And it's simply to see what the stresses are, whether they're compression or tension, across our section of beam. That's really all they are. They're very much a structural engineering tool to represent the stresses within the beam. Now, talking about beams, most relations or reference to beams that we think of when we talk about beams is the classic, the I-beam. And the I-beam is what we use in construction. Now, first of all, there's a good reason why we see I-beams used extensively throughout the construction industry. One, they're the most common beam that we see, and two, they have the greatest strength per unit mass of all of the beams that we use in construction. Which means basically, for their shape and size, they're the strongest they can possibly be, greater than any other. That's why they get used. Now, there are component parts of our I-beam that we need to be aware of. An I-beam is so called because it looks like a great big capital I if you look at it in cross-section. The wide parts of our I-beam are referred to as the flanges, and the narrow central portion is referred to as the web. The broad flanges, these resist our bending moments, which is going to cause our beam to bend. So it's resisting the stress of the beam. The narrow web in the center, this is going to resist the shear force by giving it such a wide, or I should say a high length or a large length. That's going to resist the shear force of the beam shearing somewhere in the middle. Now, when they refer to I-beams, you often see a reference, something like 12I48, that will be stamped on the side of the beam. And if you see a reference like this on a beam, say 12I48, this means that the beam is 12 inches in depth and 48 pounds per foot in terms of its strength per unit mass. Now, typically for I-beams, they're usually given in imperial measurements. However, if the beam has been manufactured in a metric country like Canada, you of course can see these using metric values as well. So it could be, for example, for 12I48, 12 centimeters deep or 48 kilos per meter, something like that. However, what we generally see is the standard sizes of beams are always generally given in imperial measurements. And then from there, you get your metric equivalents. That's generally how this thing seems to work from point of view of construction. So be aware of that regarding our I-beam. You'll get into I-beams in more detail in 2A1, where you'll start using the famous beam equation, and you'll also start calculating something called second moment of area. At the moment, we don't have to look at that. We just need to this slight introduction as to what an I-beam is and why it's built that particular way. Okay, that really is all there is to talk about Objective 5. Pretty straightforward in understanding what a stress distribution diagram is, what hogging and sagging is, and then why an I-beam is built the way it is, and what the labelling convention is of our I-beam. Now, these bending moments and shear forces are going to make a lot more sense when we get into Objective 6 and Objective 7. In Objective 6, we'll calculate our shear forces at any point in the beam, and then also when we move on and look at Objective 7, we'll calculate the bending moments at any point in a beam. So these concepts that we've just discussed in Objective 5 here will simply reinforce them mathematically in the next two objectives, and it will start to flesh out the concept for you in your head as to why shear forces and bending moments are so important when we talk about the construction or the beam in supporting a given load. So give this section a quick review. It's very straightforward, and then when you're ready, we'll move on and start getting into some calculations for shear force in Objective 6. So see you back soon.